Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude at BeyondMystic, and welcome to this deep woo-woo episode entitled The Quantum Woo with MARYAM HENEI and Danielle Rodenroth. Of course, you can find my co-host tonight at her new Twitter account at BeLady, and you can also find her at Honey Colony and here on Gab TV. MARYAM, welcome back to the show.
Hi, I'm very happy to be with everyone tonight.
Excited to have you on, MARYAM. And of course, tonight, our first time guest to the show, her name is Danielle Rodenroth, as I just said, and you can find her work at soulmapping.life. Danielle, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Excited to have you on. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here on this live interactive show. We have quite a bit of information to go through tonight, maybe new concepts that we haven't spoken on the channel before. I will take your comments as we go along, but perhaps we'll have time to do questions at the end of the show. But thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Danielle, seeing as that it is your first time here on the show, let me start by asking you how universe conspired to bring you to the work you're doing now.
Well, that's a long story, but I'd love to try to give you the short version here. So I grew up in Florida, and yeah, just from a young age, really diving into psychology and trying to understand a lot of things that I was dealing with personally led me to a lot of spiritual sciences. And then I got into a bunch of activism in my 20s and decided to leave the country. So I sold all of my stuff and I left the country, and I started getting into astrology and human design, gene keys, plant medicine, a lot of different systems, and working in communities to really kind of bring together a new way for people to operate together and just to activate themselves in like a new way.
No. Hold on, I had muted myself there. You caught me by surprise. That was a little bit too short. Okay, let's backtrack a little bit. I usually ask my guests, how were you different as a child? Did you fit in? Did you feel like an outsider? Because I'm sure a lot of our audience members, a lot of them are starseeds, wanderers, and they all had these weird ideas that nobody else seemed to have when they were kids. So how was your childhood with that?
Yeah, definitely. Both my parents were military, and I grew up in like a private school. And I was always kind of rebellious, and I didn't really like the whole like religious construct and just all the limitations placed on me. Went to a really small school, and yeah, so I kind of felt like an outsider for sure, and always into like different things, weird things, just thinking of things in a different way than most people. So yeah, I would say that that was kind of an interesting upbringing, having such like a strict military family. And then, you know, I'm over here like I'm leaving the country and like, you know, just
the black sheep of the family. Yeah. Right. Okay, and one last question. Did you by any chance have visitations as a child, or did you tend to look up at the sky a lot?
It's interesting. When I was younger, I did have like weird like I had sleep paralysis a lot, which I didn't realize that's what it was. I always thought that I was like being possessed and things like that. But as I've come to realize and studying more about like the mechanics of how the mind like perceives what we're interacting with, I've come to realize that it may not have actually been like a being or something like that, but more of like a physiological process and just part of my psychological interpretation at the time. But yeah, I mean, during the times I spent in Central and South America, I did a lot of plant medicine. So I've had a lot of experiences of being able to take my psyche in a way to kind of unveil a lot of the, what we call the Maya, and see more of things in like a coded way. Mm-hmm. So that's really more of like where I take my work now. It's more about like the mechanics and the codes and like the whole layers behind what we're seeing and perceiving, and being able to show each person's specific way that they see things. And there's even like a whole realm within the work that I do that talks about that kind of stuff, like the angels, demons, gods, ghosts, aliens, that kind of stuff. And it's actually really interesting that depending on your codes, like you'll have a certain way that you interpret specific energies that you're encountering.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the gene codes a little bit later on here, but first I want to ask Maryam how she met you, how this relationship started. So why don't we start there? Maryam, how did you find the amazing Danielle here? Tell us the story.
So I want to back up and say that I lost touch with Danielle over when the Rona hit, and I'm always thinking like, oh, who can I show off at the, I know so many amazing people, and she had crossed my mind for me to circle back like Jen and work with her. And so I was meditating and Danielle came to my mind. I'm like, oh, this is going to be awesome. And what I want to really showcase is, these multi-dimensional women or beings that can synthesize a lot of different modalities. So for me, let's say an astrologer knows more or can, if they have more tools, if they've studied the journey of the hero, if they know tarot, then you learn more languages. And so what I really want to showcase is how Danielle synthesizes and is this astral woman synthesizing using astrology, using the genetic codes, using human design that I didn't know before it was mentioned to work with her a couple of years ago now. I've lost track, to be honest, in the quickening. And to really maximize your potential. And it's like when I do like astrology readings, I say, you're not bound to this. Once you know the map, you can go off-roading. And my philosophy is know thyself. And I really think that Danielle, working with her, you can really deep dive and get those tools if you're subscribed and committed to really knowing yourself. And that includes the shadow work that she also talks about. I really, that is my philosophy. Know thyself. That is what I want to share with the world, that it's time to really take responsibility for who you are and how you're creating your reality and how we slip back into these programs. So the fact that she can look at the mechanics, and also she studied psychology as I have. So I'm just really, really happy to have her. I met her, I believe, when I was in Costa Rica, and I found out that she had been in Costa Rica and that we knew similar people. And my girlfriend, Jenny, who's an activist, who's a brilliant woman in Costa Rica, introduced me, I believe. And Danny, who's been on our show, has introduced me to the genetic keys, these codes, which you can just spend an entire year more learning. It was a download, and Danielle could speak better. So that's my intro. Thank you, Danielle, for being and for NJC for trusting my my discernment and quality caliber of spiritual beings.
I don't need to trust. I just know who you are. And of course, it all happens like magic. So thank you for being on, Maryam. And of course, doing all of this amazing homework for the audience and bringing these amazing guests time and time again. Danielle, let's go back a little bit here. You were saying about the sleep paralysis. And I'm wondering if perhaps those, for the discussion, let's call them entities, were they perhaps tweaking you in some way for the work you're doing today? Because I know gene code is one thing, but it feels to me that in your work you're putting a lot of intuition also, and you're probably being guided from external forces or perhaps from remote information. How does that all tie in for you? Have you tapped into that at all?
Yeah, and I'd like to share, like, what I've come to learn about where we receive information and how we anthropomorphize information into other beings. And because basically the work that I do and the sciences that I study, it's more about understanding that the bridging of consciousness and form. So when we talk about like the sleep paralysis or things like that, and at one point I did think like, oh, maybe it's a being or it's something that's happening. I've come to realize that it was more of like a mechanic, like a psychological and a physiological function that happened. But what I've also learned is that when we sleep, that we receive information from what we call the program. So this would be the external information, which, like in astrology, we talk about the transits, right? Like the planets moving. And what the planets do is they actually filter in those streams of external information, which is what is actually coming from neutrinos, which are from stars, right? So sometimes people, when they talk about like, oh, I've been contacted by Sirius, or I'm, you know, channeling this being or that being, they may actually just be tuning in to the neutrino stream. But I don't personally believe that it's like a being, because it doesn't have a specific form because of the way the science is that, you know, the science of neutrinos and how that operates. So that's definitely possible that it was some sort of stream of information, which is where a lot of these sciences did actually come from.
And you know, there's a lot of scientists around the world right now who are working on tapping into this galactic internet, so to speak. So you're talking about this stream right now. It's out there already. It's just a matter of how we're tapping into it. As humans, we naturally do, but a lot of this has been occulted from us, and a lot of those abilities have been suppressed with all the technology we're using here on the planet. So it's fascinating you bring that up, and the fact that
it's also interfered with, not only suppressed, but they're interfering. There's a lot of static. I mean, do you deal with that, Danielle?
Yeah, absolutely. So my specialty or my niche, what I'm really interested in with the sciences that I work with, is more about the cosmology, which is like how the whole mechanism works, right? Like how we come into form, how we die, all of that. So what you're talking about with like the interference has a lot to do with the fact that like our culture and our society and collective as a whole, we don't deal with death properly. So the beings that are dying, like they're crystals of consciousness, even though it's not a crystal, but is not actually going back to its original, we call them clusters. So they're creating like a sheath around the earth, right? That's creating an interference with the neutrino stream. And the fact that we're in like a major mutation as well. So prior to 1781, we were actually a different species, even though we look the same. And then when we discovered Uranus, which was in 1781, because prior to that point, it was Saturn was the furthest planet that we knew about. So our life cycle was correlated to Saturn, which was about 30 years, right? 1781, we discovered Uranus. Now we're in a new vehicle. So we're kind of taking some of these old world, old paradigm ways of living, and it's still here. Even though we're like in a new vehicle, we're different beings, we're trying to still kind of live in that old strategic survival-based world, rather than being in the space that we're in now, which is really about discovering what it means to exist. Like that's the time period that we're in cosmologically when you look at like the evolution of where we're going on this, you know, this whole kaleidoscope of existence. So.
Okay, you're gonna have to backtrack because a few people just fell off their chairs. So like, wait, what? We're a different species since 1781. So explain the mechanism here of how these celestial bodies bringing information and actually change the genes of our society or species here on the planet. Explain that mechanism, how we went from being vehicles that were predominantly based out of Saturn, and now from 1781 onwards, what's changed and what's about to change here also as we're moving into this age of Aquarius. You mentioned we need to be the bearer of knowledges here as we move into this new era. So explain that to the audience a little bit.
Yeah. So, and like what I'm saying with human design, like if anyone has heard about it, a lot of people think like, oh, cool, it's like how I read my chart, but it's really the science of form or the science of differentiation and how we all navigate, and even like plants and animals and everything, like the cosmology, where we're going and all of that, the whole mechanism of bringing consciousness into incarnation. So yeah, basically neutrinos are the most abundant particle. They're subatomic particles in existence. They're everywhere. They're in what is called the quote unquote empty space, and they travel just under the speed of light, and they carry mass. So each one of us is like a filter or a sponge. And before it gets to us, it goes through a whole series of pathways through certain planets. Like there's a specific pathway that it goes through. This is what creates our experience of life, right? This is what we reflect back out as, oh, this is my particular kaleidoscope of existence. So prior to 1781, the whole ocean or the medium, sorry, I had to clear my throat. The whole ocean or medium of where all of us beings were really traveling through was in a different, it was like a different ocean. So we are actually considered right now an interregnum species, like a transitional species between 1781 and 2027. So this cosmology really has come like 30 years ago, right? This has been something that has been talked about. And when we see it in this scientific way, which a lot of this has been proven by science, like how neutrinos operate. The human design system actually predicted that neutrinos had mass before science even came out and said it. And that's a very significant understanding for anyone who looks at astrology or human design or the gene codes, because that's how all of those systems actually work, is because the neutrinos carry information. That's what the mass is. So when they interact with the planet is a filter. So all of this star field that, you know, the background galactic field that's producing neutrinos, which is what's creating our consciousness field, the planets are filtering it. So because it carries mass, when it goes through a planet, it's like a red car and a white car hitting each other. So you have white paint now on the red car and red paint on the white car. And the same thing happens to us. We actually also produce neutrinos, but we take in the neutrino streams and we're getting that information, right? So when you look at the human design chart, you can see how someone is processing consciousness and how they're also using the mind incorrectly, because that is also where we are in this evolutionary space. Is prior to 1781, we were in the splenic, like the fight or flight survival space, right? Now we're in this space of like the mental, figuring out life mentally. That's where consciousness is in the ocean, right? In 2027, we're moving to what we call the spirit, but it's really the like emotional awareness, that whole plane of existence. So we're in the last 6-year period of being able to discover what it means to have a unique, differentiated consciousness. Because in 2027, we're actually going to have a new species coming in called the Rave, and they're going to operate like completely different. And what I found really interesting as well with this is that part of the mutation is that there is a genetic code that is being cut off from the genome. Yeah. And it's actually the 19th code, of course. Right? I'm like, what?
What is the 19th code? I feel, sorry, to add, I feel that maybe people, I certainly don't know who birthed the human design. Is this what you're talking about? Is this the philosophy of the human design? Who downloaded this? If we can just add some context.
Yeah, so in 1987, I think it was 1987, or it may have been the end of 1986. But basically, in our solar system, we had the first star that died, right? So in our particular solar system, it released, because we know how stars produce light, right? They're combining and combining chemicals to off gas to continue to be bright, right? But then they only have a certain lifespan. So when this star died, it blasted out all of its information. And this is where Ra Uru Hu, he actually was living in Ibiza. There's a whole story around that, but he literally received that entire stream and downloaded this entire massive system in like a matter of days. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And speak about 2027 again here, this new species that's coming up. Is this a complete transformation of the people who are here right now? Is this new people coming in right now through the birthing process? We're seeing a lot of these kids right now who are like off the chart in terms of abilities, but yet they are not connecting very well to this world. And a lot of parents are, and the medical industries are trying to push drugs on them and a bunch of things to try to address that. But are we already seeing a precursor of this new? Okay, can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So even when we just look at like physics or just how like life works, right? We see before there's mutation, which is a quantum jump, right? Like all of a sudden there's like a change. Which is happening all the time in each one of us individually. But basically, before the mutation happens, there's entropy, right? There's like controlled chaos. There's like, which is what we're experiencing right now. And some of the mutations that we're already seeing come in is like with the like autistic children. There's a lot more autism coming in, as well as like prostate cancer. These two things are like a sign, as well as those particular beings and their forms, the mutation is starting to like kind of come in. But the beings that are coming in after 2027, like there's still going to be humans like us in these 9-centered vehicles that are processing in a unique, alone experience, right? Like we can share what we're experiencing, but you can never be in my vehicle with me, and I can't really be in your vehicle with you. So in 2027, it's a new thing, right? They're not going to be as alone in their consciousness experience.
Wow.
So it's kind of like, I don't know if you've seen this show called Sense8.
Yeah.
Okay, so I kind of think of it almost like that, but definitely not really, because we're not going to be able to communicate with these beings. The most important thing that we're going to have to do coming into this is like fertility is like going to be way down. And we already know this with the jabs and all the stuff that we're seeing already, with the isolation and all that. But then there's going to have to be people like us that understand how to facilitate these beings, because they're going to come in like fast, and people aren't going to know what to do with them. So hopefully humanity like treats them right. And, but they're probably going to be put in like, you know, buildings like, oh, we're just going to stick all these babies and these beings over here because they're going to be like more than autistic. It's like more than that. But
can I ask you, can I ask you, does this have to do also this new 2027? This is part of the transhumanist agenda? This is...
No, I don't think that this particularly is. I think that, and here's the thing, because I think that we're on the same page with all that stuff. Yeah. That there's human design teaches about duality, right? That everything dualism, it's a dualistic knowledge, right? So everything is dualistic. That's even how we have our experience of life. So I think that there's going to be a dualism with that maybe some humans are going to go into that, you know, quantum tangle, you know, of the transhumanism. And at the same time, we're going to be having these beings that they don't need to like plug into a, you know, chipped matrix or whatever.
Okay. Man, we can go in a whole different direction for 2 hours here on this. Let me ask you this, though, and I think MARYAM was alluding to it. Is it possible that some of the chemical concoctions being presented to humans now, and I'm just being a devil's advocate here, folks, so don't shoot the messenger here. Is it possible that they're trying to create a different version of humanity in order to maybe intersect or to be able to communicate with this other race on a different level? Is it possible that there is that involved as well? Or is it your view perhaps that they're trying to prevent us altogether from even connecting to that, because some humans might be having their DNA awakened by the solar flares, by the galactic superwave, as Dr. Paul Leviat is saying? So which is it in your view? What's the connection to this particular species here and how we're going to connect to them? And what are the powers that be, or the powers that were on the planet, trying to manipulate here, in your view?
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole lot. And I have, before I got into all this stuff, I was deep into the rabbit hole of, you know, all the stuff that MARYAM and I are into, you know, the banking system and all of the things. So I've dived down that very deep, and that's why I left the country. So I'm very familiar with a lot of that stuff. And what I've come to realize with understanding this information and the systems that I work with is that, you know, we're in this consciousness machine, right? And that the only thing that the machine wants is, you know, for consciousness to come about. So we know that even though things can look really terrible, the collective doesn't exist. It's not a thing, right? It's a concept. It's a construct. So the they out there, right? It's like these organizations or these individuals and things like that. I do believe that there are people that, you know, are playing with information and energy, occult stuff that's really not great. But I believe that everything that's happening is like squeezing us into awakening us, because in 2027, the ocean or the turning of the global wheel of what we're going to be processing, like the new medium, the new kaleidoscope that each one of us is really experiencing, is called the sleeping phoenix, right? So the sleeping phoenix is really about rising from the ashes. It's about being busy, according to, you know, the gates and things, right? It's about being more individualized, whereas like we've spent many hundreds of years in the cross of planning, which is building up the organizations, and all of that is like shifting. So I'm not sure if I answered your question there, but
Danielle, you're saying that there's the collective. What is Maya? That struck me. What do you mean by there's no collective? Is the mechanics an illusion? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's kind of like there's like no government, right? Like there is government, but it's not a being, right? It's like a concept. It's something that everyone's agreed to. So, well, we all didn't agree to it, but still. You know, same with the collective. It's not like a being. You can't like put a pinpoint and go, oh, that's the collective, right? Collective is really more of an abstract understanding when we get down to like what the definition of it is. It's not like something more tangible. It's more like a construct. So I just think that's important to kind of think about. And the reason we have this information with human design and why the star died and we got the blast, like the whole planet, when that happened, everyone got that wave, right? Which is probably why now we have this more, the quickening of the awakening and all of that happening. But why we have the information is because we are in the end times of our particular species. And it's not gloom and doom. It's not like, oh, we got to do something to save it. It's like, no, there's an evolution happening, right? We're going to be the ones to help kind of facilitate the coming in of this new species. But the reason we have the information is because it's to help us navigate this darkness, right? They call this end information. Like this only comes at the end of a time. Yeah, because if we operate how most of the world has been operating, which is very, you know, using the mind as our driver, because we are a dualistic consciousness, right? We have the mind, which is like our computer box. It is here to translate and to transmit, right? Like what our experience is. Like it has a specific role. It's here to research. It's here to be entertained. It's here to help us to communicate correctly, but it's not meant to drive the vehicle. So what we do when we look at all of these charts and really their languages to understand how to operate correctly, it's about tapping into the consciousness that's in the other aspect, right? Which is the vehicle or the form consciousness. And that is actually very tangible. And it's something that we can see very clearly in the chart, how you're meant to operate without using the mind to drive, right? The mind is the passenger. And that's how we can have a merging of consciousness with our form, right? In the correct way. Because we all know that there's so much conditioning. We come into this world and, you know, the program even of the planets, right? So even how I use astrology, we call this like the program. And I was into astrology for many years before I got into these other systems. And the way that I use it now is more about, okay, like that's the weather, right? And that's outside of you. We want to even be sovereign, like from that, right? We want to be sovereign from whatever is happening outside of us. And that's what all these systems do, is they help us to be our own authority. So think about it. We're about to have a mutation into being, you know, an awakened individual, right? That's the 2027 mark. And all of this is about being your own authority. And so what's happening right now on the planet, right? It's like all of the hands and the restrictions and all of that coming in, because it's like pushing us to be like, no, like I'm going to be my own authority. I'm going to do what I'm here to do. And it's waking a lot of people up.
Well, that's fascinating. Even the Canadian government here before the election, they were surveying Canadians to see who was of the conspiracy mindset, and I was like, no, they're trying to figure out who's awake. Right. So anyways, right. That's interesting. Okay, man, we could do a whole other show here on human species and the evolution. That's fascinating, but I want to spend some time here talking about the gene codes themselves. So maybe take the next 2 or 3 minutes here, Danielle. Explain what that is, where that comes from, and how you apply it to helping people become the higher versions of themselves. Let's start laying down some track here on this.
Yeah, so I particularly integrate a system called human design, as well as gene keys and astrology. So human design is already a synthesis that integrates quantum physics, biochemistry, astronomy, astrology, parts of the Kabbalah, parts of the I Ching. I don't know if I mentioned that already. And parts of the chakra system, but it's not any one thing, right? It's like parts of all of those mixed together. So it gives us a really clear map of how to operate as ourselves so we can discover what our actual purpose for consciousness is here. And then the gene keys, which is like another language. So if like human design's like Spanish and then gene keys is French, they're explaining similar things, but in a different way. The gene keys is a system developed by Richard Rudd, and it gives us particular pathways through our consciousness in how each one of us has specific like archetypes of how our consciousness is going to perceive things. You know, so it's more of like a self-study aspect, but it helps us to anchor in to the physical plane correctly. And then also how our relationships, like what we're always attracting, what the lessons are, what our purpose is. There's these specific codes, and it's all correlated to your genetics and to the amino acids.
Okay. Now, I just realized too, as you're talking, you're right. I started with gene key, but this is more of a blended modality, the way you're presenting it. So okay, run the audience through what a typical session looks like of all of these blended modalities into one. Where do you start, and what do they get out of it? And let me know here if you want me to bring up MARYAM's slide from her session or not. Just guide me here for the audience on the visual part.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just kind of explain a little bit how I do it first. So normally when someone comes to me for a session, it's normally about, I do actually 4 sessions because it's so much information, and that's still scratching the surface, but it's giving you a ton of information. So we go through your human design chart, and there's so much on that. Like I could probably spend like 50 hours just on that one chart. And then I give self-study with the gene keys and kind of dive into that. We look at how the mind is programmed, like the specifics around it, and how to reprogram it to be a clear consciousness transmitter, right? Depending on your codes. And then also like what you're going to experience when you let go of the mind leading your life, like what you're actually here to experience. And on like every level, right? So there's like psychological, emotional, sexual, business wise, like, relationships, everything, even like how, like what correct words you should use. Like there's a whole way to activate, so that you're communicating in your true voice, and things like that. and also like health aspects. It just goes into a lot.
I feel that the reason why I wanted to use myself is to make it tangible for people. This is very interactive. This is really, if you are committed to know thyself and to do the work of discovery. It's an amazing discovery. The genetic codes, the gene codes book is fascinating. I was listening to it on Audible when I was in Costa Rica pre-Rona, where I often listen to things over and over again because I glean different details. But just the gene codes in itself, aside from human design, is such a powerful download. And I feel like we are in our own way, and we stand in our own way with our mind and Maya, and to understand things from a mechanical way, using astrology, using human design, using gene codes is, I mean, such a gift, really, Danielle.
Let me ask you a question, Danielle, here. A lot of people, when they start doing this know thyself introspection, doing the shadow work, as you said at the beginning of the show, they eventually hit this core wound. And for a lot of people, that's where they stop, right? This is the unsurmountable hill. And so maybe my question to you is, how maybe does this blended modality help people not only pinpoint that core wound, but actually go right through it and then into the empowerment phase? Because for a lot of people, again, as soon as they hit that core wound, they drop into fear frequency, or what you said earlier, that fight or flight, they just freeze there. They're just stuck there. So how does this blended modality help with that?
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of times, because I don't know anything about the person, right? Like, they're just giving me their birth information. Like, you need your exact birth time. So you definitely want to make sure you get that correct. You know, I don't know anything about them, and I can talk to them for many hours about several things about them. So I think that like, a lot of people will cry, like, on the sessions, because they know already a lot of what I'm saying, but I'm giving them like the precision around it, like what it means, and here's how to use it, and things like that. But as far as like the core wounding, we can take it in like several different layers. We can always just go back to the duality, right? You either have like your true self, or what we call the not self, or distortion, right? That's where you get resistance and all of that. So a lot of times we can show them like, this is your true self. This is what you're going to experience in distortion. It's very like precise, right? So it's not about like getting rid of that. It's not about getting rid of or trying to fix or anything like that. It's about learning how to use your dualistic life in a way that brings you a gem, right? Brings you some sort of unique consciousness that is what we're all here to be, right? We're all here to have something very unique to bring to the world. So when I do the charts, I like to empower people into that. And I find a lot of people want to know like all these things that are like holding them back, or, you know, the distortions that it's no one's fault. And like, that's the thing too. There's no blame. There's no guilt or shame. And that's just all program. Because it all led us up to this point. You know, it's just trying to operate correctly from here on out, because when you get this information, you're able to know with your own intelligence, like what is actually correct for you and what is not. And that's like, I think what's been going on, like our entire world, is that there's just so much illusion and like not knowing what's true, what's not. Right. And so when people get like clarity and they can feel it, like you can feel when something's correct, like you have that in your being. Right. And if I don't know anything about you, but I could tell you like all of these things that, and it's not me, like I'm not special. It's just like, I know how to weave it, you know, and transmit it to the person. And I'm very interested in it and I love it. And, you know, a lot of people, they can feel that. And so, yeah, just knowing that nothing is personal. Anything that we've gone through in our lives is also an attempt of this macro machine trying to squeeze each one of us into our truth, right? It's not like victim mentality, right? It's like, okay, when we get into victim mentality, it's, again, we need to address it. It's not bypassing, but it's like, okay, we need to address it and see what it's trying to show us. Because anytime that we're not in alignment we're getting distortion, right? So there's clear ways that that shows up. And this is also why most of what I do is reframing how people think, because so often we're taking our mind and, oh, I think I want that, right? And so we go after it, but it may not actually be correct. And then what we think is a successful life or what we want in life, it's not the point. Like, we're not here to be, you know, a lot of people like, I just want to be happy. I'm like, okay, but that's not actually like, yes, you can be happy, but how can we embrace, like, you know, there's so many false programs even around what we think our life should look like.
Right. There's somebody else in our driver's seat many times with all these old programs. Maryam, you had your hand up.
Yeah. Yes. One thing that, again, I'm trying to make it tangible for people. One thing that was very pertinent, and also, you know, this is something, it's a study, right? So you can go back into victim stance. I can attest for that. And these are programs that we're trying to delete or rewrite. So one thing that Danielle had told me is that I don't have any feelings, meaning I'm empty, but when I'm around someone, then I'm adopting that. So I wanted to talk about that. But then another thing of, she told me not to make the first move or to go after something. And I just remembered, like, oh shit, I slipped on that one, because I'm very much in my male and go-getter, but the bees have taught me, like, no, just be, just let it come to you, magnetize it like honey. So that's like some tangible thing that she relayed to me, looking at these different codes, that is really transformational if you can remember that. And that goes against the, you know, the programs of, like, you have to go work for it, and we're in a so can you speak, can you comment
Okay,
on
what we're going to do here, because I know this is very complex if you've just heard this before, we're going to bring up a chart from Maryam's session, and we're going to ask Danielle here to maybe guide us through the chart. So you guys who are visual will say, oh, okay, that's what they're talking about here. That'll make a lot of sense. But I like what you were saying, Danielle, about this duality and this concept of always falling back on victimization. And for me, I always say this on my show, I'm like, wait. Universe is not doing this to you, it's doing this for you. So and a lot of times that's hard to swallow, especially when you're deep into the sorrow or whatever circumstance you're in. But you have to go back to what you just said, Danielle, which is, well, why is this happening? What is this opportunity? What is it trying to teach me? And I think that in terms of changing your language and your mindset of how you view things, that'll bring you a quantum leap forward if you can change that victimization into that empowerment, for sure. Okay, let's bring up that chart for Maryam here. Okay, what are we looking at here? And guide me through where you want to go as we continue this conversation here.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the first things when we look at these charts is that we understand that it's giving us the first practical thing for all of us to be able to make movement, right? So making movement down your trajectory, because each one of us has a particular path, is always how we enter into decisions, right? So that's one of the first things that we can see in a chart is, how does this person enter into the geometry of decision making? Because not everyone is the same, right? We know that. So when we look at Maryam, and you know, normally I would take like an entire hour in a reading going through what we call the strategy and authority, which really gives us just the description of how you process consciousness by entering decisions correctly. So we look at Maryam, and Maryam is what we would call a generator. Sorry, I just noticed, I think I spelled your name wrong on there. I'm sorry. But yeah,
it sounds like mayhem. Yeah, sometimes she's mayhem, but it's more like Maryam.
I'm like trying to talk, and I'm like,
I think that was a Freudian slip.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. But yeah, so she would be considered what we call a generator. So there are 4 main types of vehicles on the planet, and then there's so many different possibilities of differentiation from that. But the type of the vehicle gives us a description of how you need to enter correctly into decision making. So Maryam, right, she is a generator. And being a generator, which I'm also a generator, the strategy of generators is actually about waiting to respond and waiting for things to come to you. So this is what Maryam was talking about with not making the first step, not initiating, not taking what your mind is telling you and trying to go. That's really not the correct way to drive the vehicle, even though most of the planet has been conditioned, right? The planet is conditioned to operate that way. So that's why when we come into this information, it's about experimenting with your strategy. How do you enter? How can you than what you've done before, right? So Maryam, right, it's about waiting for things to come to you. And then you use your intelligence within your body to decide if it's correct. Because again, the mind can't be part of the decision making. So there's so much information in this chart to be able to explain. But that's really like the first part when you're looking at a chart is like, how should this person make decisions? Now, once you know that part, you can kind of look back and go, okay, well, I'm in this relationship. Did I get into it correctly? Or I'm in this job, or I'm in this, whatever it is, did I enter that correctly? Or am I meeting a lot of frustration and resistance and things like that? Because our mind can push us to do a lot of things that, we think are correct, but it's not actually correct. But I want to give you guys maybe, and Maryam, some more specific things about your chart, because you've got everyone's chart is perfect, but, being a 6-2 and having the cross of obscuration, which is a lot about your pathway, right? Obscuration and seeing in the darkness, right? Bringing out details and terms, naming things, trying to translate through what you've been receiving from the void into society, right? Into the world, and trying to help create a new order. That is a lot of what your cross is about.
Wow.
I find that really interesting. So as long as you enter things correctly, you follow your satisfaction, because that is your, what we call the energy signature. Each type has like an energy frequency. This literally does come down to frequency. So when we understand how each one of us is processing, right? So we have our definition, like our mechanics, right? The cogs in the machine, our particular form. And then we're receiving like a prism that's receiving the light and the rainbow that's coming out, right? Each one of us is processing that differently. What we're understanding is that we have the ability to either resonate with our true frequency or to operate in distortion, right? So just having that awareness is going to help us to come back into our truth, right? But yeah, so you're just showing a picture right now of the different vehicles, right? There's generators, which are about 60 to 65% of the population. We're like the builders. So I'm also a generator. Maryam, you're a generator. So we're designed like what we want in our lives. If we're generators, like what our soul wants is to be satisfied using our energy correctly. Whereas if we're not doing that and we're in distortion, we meet frustration and we degenerate, right? So there's very clear signposts for all of that. The reflector, which is actually pretty rare, even though it's still millions of people on the planet, they're a little bit more than 1% of the population. And they're kind of almost like the oracle, or they reflect back. They are like these activators that when you meet them, they reflect back aspects of yourself, and they activate you, and they help really elevate the consciousness in the entire planet. There's a lot I could go into about that one.
Okay. And the protector?
I'll just touch on the projector and manifestor, and then we can move on. But
Okay.
yeah, the projectors, they're about 22% of the population, and they're here to be guides. So there are people on the planet that are not here to work. They are here to actually see energy and watch where it's going, guide it. They have different vision. I kind of think of it like they're on like the side boat, right? With the sonar or the thermal dynamics, and they're watching the interaction of others. And so they're like the seers. And a lot of times though, they're trying to be the builders, right? So that's their conditioning. So it's helpful to know what you are so that you're not killing yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the manifestors, they're really here to kind of be the ones that inform new things into the world. And then they get the rest of us, like the rest of the people, to help build it or move it, or because they can change the quantum.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's so much I could talk about each one of those.
Can we talk a little bit about some of the gene codes? Like you had mentioned 19 earlier. What does 19 stand for? And if we can, because I feel like this really brings it to life. And I just want to add a little, just a comment or an observation. One, you feel seen using all these different modalities. What you're doing is brilliant, and you can get that one download and it can transform your entire life if you start operating in that different manner.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
somebody, Jim Montgomery says, JC, you should do this. I actually did this like 5 years ago. So I have my chart. I was trying to pull it up before the show. I think it's on my old laptop to see
we'll have to
compare with MARYAM, because MARYAM and I are very similar in many ways, but also we have our differences. But anyways, keep going. It's not about me. Keep going here.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah. So one of the aspects or the specifics that we can look at is the we call them the gates, or 64 codons of DNA, the 64 gene keys, right? So if we go back to that first chart on the top where MARYAM, her chart is, you'll see that there's all these numbers in there. So those are the 64 codes, right, of the matrix of what we experience as humans in this world. And even if the chart was blank, like we can just see.
If you go down, JC. Right?
Yeah, either one. They both have it, but yeah, I'm going to bring that aspect in. But yeah, so the numbers, the 64 codons of DNA, there's 64 hexagrams in the I Ching, which gives us the numbers in the human design and the gene keys. Okay, so the gene keys come from the I Ching, which is a really ancient system that correlates the elements and how we can understand their combinations it creates like a wheel so that we can understand the different angles of our reality, right? All these wheels that all these cultures have always had, it's like our way of trying to interpret. So they're just different languages. But the 64 codons of DNA, right? As within, so without, right? The micro and the macro. The 64 codons of the DNA correlate to these 64 directions, right? We know that astrology has 12 directions, right? The 12 signs. Well, in human design, we also divide it by 64 directions, which gives us these archetypes of our codons. So yes, when I was talking earlier about the 19th code being cut off, it's a lot about all the things that have to do with the 19, which is, in many lenses, it's the pressure to find God. So there's even this like understanding where religion came from. It's the skin, it's boundaries, it's food, it's our needs. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about.
Oh my God. Own nothing and be happy.
So we can even see how like the pressure to find God, correlates directly to like the sacrifice, the needs, our skin, our hair, our nails. It's like the boundaries, right? So there's so many lenses that you can look at each one where it's like, ooh, that's that thing. Like, oh, but in a relationship, it's also you know, the gate of flirting. You know, it's what creates courting, you know, courtship. You know, it's taking care of animals. It's all these different things. But it's the start of the mystical process, which is also very interesting.
What am I looking at here?
We're looking at a bunch of bubbles. No,
I recognize this one from my chart too. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this one is called the Gene Keys. If you go to genekeys.com, that's Richard Rudd's site, and he is amazing. And so this is another system that provides a pathway through.
I don't even remember seeing this. Wow.
Through the spectrum of consciousness of your particular codes. And so there's like a particular path. So if you look at the green ones are called the activation sequence. You start at the top. So for Maryam, your life's work has a lot to do with the 61, right? The teacher of inspiration, which is really 61. And this is why I bridge it with the other languages, because it's about occult knowledge. It's the gnosis, the inner knowing, all of these things, right? And we can see your biggest challenge would be that 61 plus the 62, which is the evolution, right? This is the pathway of your biggest challenge is how to accept psychosis, which we need to reframe what this is. Psychosis is either looping, like continuing to think about something, but not like getting the answer. It's kind of like
Maryam does not do that at all.
I can't relate at all. It's called ruminating.
Yes, yes, yes. But it's the stroke of genius, right? So, and this is why it's so important, because even when we say that word, like psychosis, there's so much tied to it, but it's really a definition of how the translator box, your computer box, your mind, it's like when a mutation is coming in for your inspiration, for you, Maryam, it's going to show up as this looping, really it's internal noise. It's almost like your mind is typing in DuckDuckGo the same questions over and over, and trying to get.
How do you turn it off?
You can't. The only thing that you can do.
How do I get rid of a narcissist? How do I get rid of a narcissist? Oh, yeah. Internal joke, folks. Hey, before we go too far, Danielle, there's somebody in the chat saying, hey, don't send your DNA to anybody. They're going to do this. And okay, first of all, like how do you get this? It's not about getting your DNA. Can you explain that before everybody goes wonkers here?
Yeah, so trust me, I'm not dealing with anyone's blood or anything like that. That's weird. No, this is about understanding that the codes of our DNA, like the codons, correlate like micro, macro, right? So we can see our location. Yeah, our location in existence through this lens, right? And it just correlates as well to our codons in our DNA. We don't need a blood test to see the archetypes that our specific DNA is more receptive to. Because we have, all of us have all 64 of them. So, yeah.
Fascinating. And why don't we touch upon some of the astrology here? That was the last chart in her document here. What are we looking at, or what's noteworthy here for the audience?
Yeah, so this particular chart that I pulled for her is just the natal chart, which is like the snapshot of when you take your breath, your first breath, right? Where those planets are. And remember, we talked about the planets being filters of that neutrino stardust information, right? So you are incarnated from stars. That is actually like a science thing. This shows us, you know, particularly different aspects. So I'll look at like what house this is. So we just talked about her 61 as an example, which in the astrology would be her sun code. So if you put your mouse in the 5th house over there, bottom right, where that circle with the dot is.
Child.
Yeah. So, and it's in Capricorn, it's in the 5th house. So I would look at that as well. Like this is her business, right? And 5th house is like her expression, her creativity, and how she's rising up in the world. And I would look at other things that are in there, like her Jupiter's right next to it. Right. So that's like, it's really expanded. So Jupiter's coming around and just blowing it all up and just, you know, making it more and more and more. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to discuss, but that's the way that I use astrology, is to get like another layer of information. But always when we start with all this stuff, it's about, you know, starting immediately, which is, okay, if we want to change our life, if we want to be correct, if we want to be in alignment and really discover the meaning of our life, right? Especially in these times, because I believe that's what's happening. All the things we thought were important are just like falling away. Like that actually wasn't important. Shit. Okay. Like moving forward. Right.
Yeah.
So if we want to do that, we have to start with, you know, putting the mind in the passenger seat and operating with how our form was intended to lead the life. Right. And then watching that, observing that, because we aren't actually in control. And that's something that a lot of people may have a hard time with. In human design, we say no choice, right? What the choice is, though, is where we resonate in our frequency and to what trajectory, what timeline, what quantum space are we going to vibrate and maintain? And then watching, observing, and seeing what's coming in, you know, with the mind. So we always look at how we should operate the vehicle correctly. That's very practical. And then from there, it's not about changing yourself. Like when people come to me, it's not like I'm giving you a whole list of like, oh, you got to do this, this, and that. It's like,
it's about being in alignment more than anything else, right? And that's where, of course, all the magic happens. Man, we're already at the hour mark. Holy crap, this goes fast. I have a gazillion questions. I think we're going to have to do a part 2. But there's a lot of people in the chat already saying, oh my God, I want to try this. Okay, cool. So folks, we put together a package for you guys. It's at, let me bring up the soulmapping.life/BeyondMystic for your coupon code. Now, let's go through this page a little bit here for the audience and let us know what are the options there for them.
Yeah.
Maybe where they should start if it's their first time getting into this material.
Definitely. So, and we've made this landing page that already has a discount. It's just for you guys that are listening, or, you know, that you guys have the link. So, yeah, the quantum jump is definitely what I recommend. It's like I was talking about earlier, it's 4 separate sessions. Because we need to go through like a lot of information. As you can see, we did an hour on this call and it's like, I can't really, like, I need to just be able to go into it, you know?
Yeah.
And there's so much information. So it's like 1 hour a week, you know, for 4 weeks. And I give you self-study and anything that I feel like you might need. I have some courses and things like that that I might give you, or books or things like that as well. So I would definitely recommend that one, where we would go into all the charts and we do it live through Zoom together, and I record it, create a document for you, pull all your advanced charts. We can go into everything. And then some people do the rebirth session as well, which is the one on the right there. And that's a more intensive one. It's about 10 to 12 sessions or more. I don't really put like a limit on it. It's just depending on like how often and how much we need to get through. So it's probably at least 10 sessions with a lot of information. Mostly the quick tune-up, the one in the middle, is for people who've already had sessions with me. But if you're on the fence and you're not really sure if you want to do the quantum jump or the rebirth, you could just do the quick tune-up, and it's an hour-long call. But like I said, we won't be able to get through quite as much. But
it'll get your feet wet and your understanding, and perhaps it'll get you to a place where you can ask more questions to then go into these other sessions and get even more out of them as a, you know, maybe more informed participant. That's fabulous. Okay. Anything else we need to know? So coupon code, 5% off of these bookings. It's already integrated in this link. Let me bring the link, guys. If you're watching this on replay, is already in the description box below. Let me bring this back here to live chat. Maybe I can ask you this, Maryam. As you went through this and you saw this data here for the first time, speak to the audience about how it affected you and how maybe you learned different aspects of yourself. You started the show by saying know thyself is key here. What did you learn through this process? And perhaps some of the audience here can relate to that.
That really the self journey is infinite, and that I really believe they talk about in Course in Miracles, or Marianne Williamson says it's really a muscle. And so I feel like I didn't even dive into so many of the, like that map. I don't even recall it. So I just again, I feel that Danielle is brilliant, and I'm all about really, I'm attracted to people that work on all these different realms and know how to synthesize it and translate it. And the more modalities you know, so that if you're working with her, I mean, like, just like that one example, I mean, I feel like I want to tune up and, you know, things unraveled and stuff. So I just feel like there's so many kernels of gold that you can use to fine tune and reach your potential, your sovereignty, and for distinction. I mean, I just think it's fascinating. You get all of these instead of just doing human design or just doing the gene codes. But I do want to say that you get more out of this depending on what you put into it.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Somebody's saying here,
thank you.
somebody's saying here, you're not your body, you operate one. And I would go as far as to say, you think you're operating your body, but a lot of your programs are operating it for you. And I think this is what Danielle was alluding to here. It's how to perhaps find those programs that no longer serve you and kick them out of the driver's seat so that you can get back into alignment with who your actual soul and your makeup is, really to be in alignment with that mission. Fabulous, man. Okay. MARYAM, I'll come back to you here for last words and the work that you're doing now and anything else you want to share with the audience. We'll come back to you, MARYAM. But before we go, Danielle, is there anything else maybe that I missed? Any questions I should have asked, or anything that you think is important now to share with the audience before we close the show today?
Yeah, I mean, I just thank you so much. And this is really fun. And thank you all for sticking it out and everything. I know we got a little bit, you know, out there for a bit. But yeah, there's a lot of information in these systems, and I hope you guys found it helpful. And yeah, thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And of course, folks, that is soulmapping.life/BeyondMystic for that coupon code. And Jim says, JC, you nailed it. I try. Man, I try. This was a tough session, but yes, maybe a part 2 at some point to look at this new species that is developing. I had 1,000 questions on that and how we relate to it. And there's so much there. We could probably do a 4-hour show on that alone. Yeah, but yeah, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for all of your time here, Danielle, and your field of work here of service to others is absolutely amazing. So big thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much, MARYAM. Thank you for introducing us and bringing me here.
I'm all about cross-pollinating.
And MARYAM, before we go, yes, MARYAM's the queen of pollinating. Mayhem Henei. Introducing you as Mayhem Henei now. Okay, MARYAM, any last words? Well, no, actually, before the last words, what's going on now? So I know that your Twitter has been taken away. So this is the new Twitter here. So let me bring that link down. And of course, guys, it's all in the description box below. So
please support my abusive relationship with Jack Dorsey and Twitter.
Yes. There you go. And also, you're producing a lot of cool stuff here, including this last video with Sarah Westall on the blood. And I'm going to
It's not with Sarah Westall. It's Sarah. Sarah featured my work because I need help. I'm relying on digital soldiers to share. That is very powerful when they co-opt your information and pass it off as theirs when you're a year in the future. But in this case, this video is someone took me aside, and I'm also making calls. I broke what's in this Tris is for kids, and just making calls and trying to keep people accountable. And I'm on the front lines. And I want to say also with Danielle, it's about really integration. That's an important part of our work. And that is revisiting and practicing that muscle. That there's, you do plant medicine or you have a session, but if you don't really integrate it, it's not going to have those lasting changes. And I speak for myself, having recently delved into martyrdom instead of remembering I'm a kick-ass warrior and I refuse to be stopped. So, you have moments of you have to repent and forgive yourself. I think that's very important. And I'm maybe there's people out there who are very hard on themselves, and it's very discouraging when you have literally your throat chakra is attacked. And I want to be the voice for others, and I'm often told that I'm channeling and speaking for people, and I want to continue to do that. And I just want to share that I'm going to be at some point going to an open mic and just starting as a comedian and just doing like an unvaccinated vermin bit and using my information like to make people laugh. Hopefully no one will throw tomatoes at me.
Okay. Hold on a second. You're hilarious. I'll go to open mic night with you anytime. All one says, JC, the soul mapping link isn't working. Of course it's working. I was on it 2 seconds ago. I'm on it now. It seems to be working fine for me. Wait, sorry, this page is missing. What just happened? You're right. It just disappeared.
I will get it fixed here. I'm not sure. Quantum Woo?
I don't know. It was on earlier. See? Soul mapping, Beyond Mystic. And now
no, that's right. It's supposed to be soul mapping. We changed it, remember? To the Quantum Woo.
Oh, instead of Beyond Mystic?
Yeah. Well, just because the show is Quantum Woo.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
She asked me.
But wait, I still had the link in my email. Wait, why was it there earlier?
Yeah, that's
okay. Hold on. You didn't tell me that before the show. Okay, now I got it.
Sorry.
All right. Thank you, folks, for letting me know.
I didn't know that you had the older link. Sorry.
Well, thank you guys. See, it's amazing. My audience is right on the ball. If I do something wrong, they'll tell me right away. Okay, so hold on. I'm going to add this back to the description box below. Also, if you guys are watching this on repeat, you'll have the correct link here. Okay, so hold on. And okay, MARYAM, while I do that, tell us about some of your functional medicine book coaching sessions here for the audience.
Okay, so I've been doing these mini sessions, like for the show or for this week. I pulled this destroyer. This deck is very special, this archetype deck, and it's been really in service to be acute. I try not to pull too many cards, so I just do a little reading, and I'm focusing on how I can, on the physical level, help your physical body so that you can fix your vessel to be able to, I mean, there's different layers, right? But I'm focusing on nutrition and getting you healthy and inspiring you, educating you from a biohacking functional medicine point of view. And I'm using the cards as well to just give you a message so that it has a spiritual aspect to it. So you can also use BeyondMystic as the coupon code and buzz on over to Honey Colony and support Made in America, a company persecuted by the FDA, DOJ, and FTC.
You're one of those repeat offenders, are you? I know how that goes. MARYAM, before you go, also, I know you're working on additional information here for your George Floyd book. So let me bring up the trilogy you and I produced a couple of months ago. Folks, if you haven't seen that, go check it out. It's a 3-part series here for $3.99. Absolutely amazing, crazy stuff that MARYAM is putting together here for her book. And let's talk about what you're working on now and how you need the audience's help here moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm really preoccupied right now. I've given a break, not to the documentary, but to the book, because I've been commissioned as a functional medicine and journalist in this space to do a detox guide that's going to go out to hundreds of thousands of people. And I'm really doing a deep dive to understand the mechanisms in which this is working on you. So, but I'm about to premiere an updated trailer with never before seen footage. We are going to be rolling it out, premiering it next Friday. I believe that's the 12th at 8 p.m. EST. I am raising funds to support my work. I've spent thousands of dollars, thousands of hours so far. I am telling you, I've been told, get protection because you've come across a FBI operation. And right now they are releasing 1,500 pages having to do with the jurors, and I'm wanting to get those papers. I will provide a receipt. I've raised $500. Thank you to people like Jim and Rocco for believing in me, for seeing my heart, and also supporting my, I'm detoxing from mold so I can get my brain back to where it's supposed to be. It's a real thing, mold. So that's right now. Yeah, I've raised $500. If you go to Patreon for just $5, you can have a sneak peek at the trailer. And this will be circulating back. A lot of people are like, who cares about George Floyd? I understand. But if you really unravel how a psyop works and you see the holes in it, you can start to wonder what else is real in this actor-based reality that we've found ourselves in.
What do you mean? It wasn't a real story? You and I, of course, did this 3-part decode, guys. Go check it out. And of course, you can support Maryam here on her Patreon at patreon.com/Maryam Henei. And you'll also find in the description box below the link to her Venmo tip jar if you guys want to support her there.
Because I just want to say, Patreon has just updated their TOS, and from now on you have to go to the person who you're featuring in your content and get a consent form. So chances are the trailer won't be up there for long because George Floyd is dead, and so are they. You know, I can't get access to the other people in this trailer.
But is he really? Didn't he buy some products from you after he died? All right,
to be alive.
I'm just having fun with you guys. Man, that time goes by so quickly. Folks, please do go also and follow Maryam on her YouTube. I know there's more censored data, but follow her on Gab as well. I put it up on the screen a little earlier tonight. And of course, if you're watching the show and you love what we're doing, please like, share, and subscribe here at Jean-Claude at BeyondMystic 3, my third backup channel. Le Recidiviste, myself, the multiple severe offender, as Maryam calls me. There you go. And tomorrow we have Cosmic Agency with Gosha. She's coming back at 3 p.m. Eastern. And at 4 p.m. tomorrow, Teaching Children with Sherry Divban and Janine. So that's going to be absolutely fabulous. So please join us for that. This was the Quantum Woo with Maryam Henei and Danielle Rodenroth. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. I love you guys. Have a great evening and au revoir.